Police and protesters clash in Hong Kong. These demonstrators fear their city's autonomy is over after China passes sweeping anti-sedition legislation. I'm Imran Gupta, and today's newsmaker is Hong Kong's new security law. For more than 2 decades, Hong Kong has largely been in control of its own affairs. But could those days now be in the past? Many residents say the territory's unique status is under threat after Beijing decided to impose a new national security law. The stated aim of the legislation is to keep the city safe and safeguard China's sovereignty. But protesters in Hong Kong are calling it an assault on their autonomy and civil rights. Several Western nations have also expressed deep concern. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says it's the death knell for the city's freedoms. And the UK, Canada and Australia have reprimanded China for violating international obligations. But Beijing shows no signs of backing down. So could Hong Kong really be on the verge of losing its special status? Adam Pletz reports.
Once again, there are protests in the streets of Hong Kong, triggered by China's decision to impose a new national security law. It will criminalize acts of subversion, succession, terrorism, and foreign interference. But demonstrators say it will likely be applied to crush dissent and erode the territory's autonomy.
For now, it is important for us, for people, to realize it is time to protest. If we don't protest, we give up our rights, and there are no way back for Hong Kong people if the national security law is implemented.
Since its handover from the UK in 1997, Hong Kong has enjoyed a special status and rights including an independent judiciary, freedom of speech and representative elections. Many demonstrators fear Hong Kong will be completely subsumed by China, ending their freedoms, democracy and human rights. But Beijing says it is simply acting to promote stability and against those calling for independence.
Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China and is directly under the central government. Establishing and improving a national legal system and enforcement mechanism protects national sovereignty, security and development. It's being done to ensure the steady implementation of the one country, two systems principle. This issue is a Chinese internal affair, and no foreign countries can interfere.
The UK, EU and US have condemned the new security law, saying it breaks China's agreement with the UK, which should guarantee Hong Kong's special status until 2047.
They broke their word to the world on ensuring the autonomy of Hong Kong. The United States wants an open and constructive relationship with China, but achieving that relationship requires us to vigorously defend our national interests. The Chinese government has continually violated its promises to us and so many other nations.
The Trump administration says it no longer considers Hong Kong autonomous from mainland China, and that could have implications for Hong Kong's status as one of the world's major financial hubs. In November, district elections resulted in a landslide majority for pro-democracy parties. But some protesters are now demanding outright independence, encouraged, Beijing says, by international interference. As China continues to insist that it supports the one country, two systems approach, have demonstrators exaggerated the threat? Or is Beijing moving to prematurely end Hong Kong's special status? Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
Well, let's go to Hong Kong and speak to Solicitor Johnny Ip. He's the Deputy Spokesman for the pro-establishment political party Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong. And Wilson Leung is a barrister and pro-democracy activist. Good to have you both on the program. Wilson, let me begin with you.
Thank you.
Beijing believes that this new national security law is absolutely essential. Are you against it in totality?
Yes, I'm against the way it's being done, because one has to remember what's happening is that Hong Kong's legislature itself is being completely shoved out of this process. What's being done is that the law is being drafted completely up in Beijing without any participation by Hong Kong's own legislature, and it will then impose these very concerning and draconian concepts on Hong Kong. What's even more concerning is that according to Article 4 of the Chinese Parliament's decision, it's possible that there will be Chinese mainland agents stationed in Hong Kong to enforce these laws. So the way it's being done, what's being done, and who's going to enforce it is all extremely concerning. And this all needs to be taking a step back and to really reconsider the way to do this.
So, Johnny Ip, if there's any respect for the autonomy of the Hong Kong legislature, why not get them involved? Why has Beijing completely blocked the local leadership in Hong Kong out of this process?
Well, we have to understand that in the Article 23 of the Basic Law, there's an obligation in Hong Kong special administrative government to implement, to have the local legislation regarding law against the national security, regarding treason, sedition, secessions, and subversion. Clearly, in the past 23 years, this law has not been enacted, and there's still many local disputes regarding that. But we have seen that in the past few months, the promotion of Hong Kong independence is getting more concerned of the general public.
But hold on, Johnny, just for a second. You do not see this as an extension of a process where last year we had the extradition bill that was tabled, massive pushback, and now we have this. This hasn't happened in a vacuum. Surely those people who are out on the streets see this as an increasing encroachment on their autonomy and their freedoms. You would accept that, wouldn't you?
Well, clearly it's not, because in your video you say that the jurisdiction of judiciary is in harm. But Wilson and I are both in the legal profession, and we did not see that there's any harm to this to our judiciary. Regarding there's a concern or threat to the one country, two system, that has been guaranteed by many Beijing officials that one country and two system will be implemented as usual. So as our profession, I think we should guarantee to the foreign state or the foreign country saying that the Hong Kong autonomy will continue. For example, the common law system will continue. There's no threat to that. And I don't think that the Hong Kong public to be too concerned. Well, as stated in one research, one survey published yesterday, over 50% of the Hong Kong public are saying that there is need for a law to protect the national security, as there's an obligation before the handover and after the handover as well. So probably it's time to deal with that.
Okay, so let's
we saw that.
So let's take that. Okay, so a couple of things that I want Wilson to respond to. Number one, the fact that your profession, you both share the same profession, according to Johnny, it hasn't been touched by Beijing and it is independent. That was what Johnny said. So you can address that. And after that, address this idea that, yes, it's one country, two systems, but national security comes under the one country. It doesn't come under the two systems. So if you want national security decisions to be made separately, that makes it two countries, two systems. So address that for me, Wilson.
Yeah, I'll just take that in reverse order. The first one is about whether it's one country, one system, one country, two system. Now, Johnny mentioned Article 23 of the Basic Law. Now, that's a very important article because it says there that the Hong Kong government will, and these are the words there, on its own enact national security legislation. Now, these are very important words. Now, the pro-Beijing camp's argument is that, since the Hong Kong government hasn't been doing a good job in enacting it, we are going to step in. But that's exactly the problem, because autonomy, and remember, it's a high degree of autonomy, which has been guaranteed to Hong Kong, doesn't mean that when the autonomous region doesn't act as quickly as you like or in the exact way that you like, then you step in and say, oh, I'm going to take over that for you. Because if you do that, then that's not really autonomy, is it? That's just you can do whatever you want as long as it's also what I want. So that's the first answer. Now, addressing the independence of the judiciary, it's not really about whether the judges are independent, because the judge's role in any system is to enforce the laws as they are written. The judge's role is not to rewrite the laws. They're not to consider whether the laws are well written or not. And the problem is that you now have these laws, potentially very draconian, being drafted up in Beijing, and then when they are imposed on Hong Kong judges will have to enforce them, like it or not.
Okay,
so one example.
Okay.
Sorry,
So before you give that example, Johnny, to that point,
Yes,
the judges are free to enforce the law, but they have no say in the law which is being drafted in Beijing. Go ahead.
but the National People Congress Standing Committee is inviting comments from Hong Kong to give any comment regarding the drafting. And we have some research in Hong Kong back in 2002 when the Article 23 was published to the general public for comment. So I guess that the central government will take that into account. But going back to the basic law, not only Article 23 should be read, but it should be read together with Article 18, where they talk about national unity, when they talk about defense. Well, we have to consider national security as a matter of national defense as well. We have seen the threat of trade war, cyber war, and the dispute in South China Sea, as the retired Judge Henry Litton written on the newspaper this morning, saying that the judiciary and the lawyer should support the national security law, because we can see that in other jurisdictions, other common law jurisdictions, even in Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, they have this law as well. So probably it's time to protect the national unity.
I want to ask you a more political question here, Johnny. When you have the United States, you have Australia, and you have many European nations, the United Kingdom as well, criticizing this proposed law, criticizing what they call repression on the streets. Do you believe that they are harming the national security of your country?
Surely there's a concern regarding what they said, but I think we should guarantee to the foreign government that nothing has changed. There's no, because the basic law or that agreed with the British government that there should be no political alliance with the political parties or association in Hong Kong. That is agreed by the British. So there's a real concern that now it's time for them to respect what have said in the basic law. And the drafter at that time also agreed to that. So probably it's time for the overseas government to respect that there's a concern that, and there's a need for the Hong Kong's security law to be passed.
So Wilson, there's a feeling from Beijing and a feeling from those Hong Kongers who are more aligned towards Beijing or less supportive of the protesters, that there is a lack of respect from outsiders when outsiders say we are in solidarity with the people on the streets. How do you feel about that?
Well, Hong Kong, of course, we know is an international city. And whenever you speak about a topic, you have to identify who the stakeholders are. And whenever you have a consultation, for example, you identify the stakeholders. In Hong Kong's case, the stakeholders are the international community. Hong Kong isn't some city in the interior of China. It's an international finance center, and everyone has a stake in. I'm not sure what Johnny finds so amusing. Perhaps he can share, whatever joke he has. But if I could just finish, Hong Kong is an international finance center. Everyone has a stake here. Capital flows from elsewhere to here. And remember, Hong Kong's autonomy is the subject of an international treaty between the UK and China lodged at the United Nations. And it's an enforceable treaty. So absolutely, the international community has a stake in Hong Kong and has a right to speak out when his autonomy is threatened.
Johnny?
Well, how about one country? We are part of the People's Republic of China. What is your response to that? Would you say that the stakeholders are the foreign country? How about the stakeholder of Beijing central government? in the basic law, it say that we are part of the national. We are in the one country. How about this? Well, Wilson, it's lovely to hear from you. Respond to that.
If I may respond, no one's denying that, and it's just a false argument to say that, oh, if you are resisting this law, you must be denying one country. Of course, it's one country. It's written there in the basic law. But because the one country, two systems model is embodied in the joint declaration and the basic law, you have to actually look at what it says. So what it says is in Article 23, the Hong Kong government does it on its own. Article 18 says that national laws should not be applied unless they're within the areas of defense, foreign affairs, and matters outside the autonomy of Hong Kong. And actually, Johnny made an error. The basic law was not drafted by the British. The basic law was drafted by a committee formed of Beijing heavyweights and then Hong Kong elites chosen by Beijing back in the 80s and 90s. So it's not something that the British agreed on. It's something that the Chinese itself was agreeable to.
Okay, Johnny, in your response, fold in a response to this as well. Concerns among many young people that they have no future in Hong Kong, many of those interviewed by Bloomberg and other outlets which have bases in Hong Kong. They've been saying, we don't want to live here anymore. We want to leave. Some are thinking of going to Taiwan. Some are thinking of going to the UK and so on, who are dangling this sort of branch to say, hey, come on over. How do you feel about that? Doesn't that tell you that something might be awry if young people want to leave?
Okay, first respond to that as stated by Wilson, that because the joint declaration actually talk about the basic law as well. So literally, the British government agreed to what have been drafted in the basic law. And even before the handover, there has been a bill proposed by the colonial government regarding the national security, dealing with treason. Because, well, we have many legislators or even the judiciary agree that the current ordinances do not deal with treasons or secessions or breaking the unity of one country in any great details. Regarding Adam's questions, the youngster want to move out of Hong Kong. Well, that's only a myth. Well, let's talk about the property market, the stock market. In the past weekend, where after Donald Trump said that he's going to sanction Hong Kong or removing its special status regarding Hong Kong, actually the stock market is raising high today. Regarding the property market,
but Johnny, I mean, these are very real people who have been very literally quoted in outlets saying we want to leave. So I don't know if you can actually say it's a myth and then give references to the past. However, I mean, we're not going to prove anything to each other now on that particular issue, but it's something worth following up on later on. I'm looking forward to hearing from both of you at some point later on, but I've got to move on. Just one thing worth noting. When the US State Department had criticized China over Hong Kong, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Hua Chunying, tweeted back saying, I can't breathe. Everybody's trolling everybody at this point in time. And this makes it all the more difficult to sort of get to the heart of the matter here. I'm glad we got a bit more insight on this issue with the two of you. Johnny Ip and Wilson Leung, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Yemen has been left devastated by more than 5 years of war. Now the country has to contend with COVID-19 as well. While officially there are less than 500 confirmed cases, the number of infected people is thought to be much higher. The UN says the healthcare system has already collapsed, with doctors being forced to turn away the sick as they simply cannot care for them. So, is there any way to ease what's become a catastrophic crisis? Well, let's ask Dr. Rick Brennan, who is the World Health Organization's Regional Emergency Director for the Eastern Mediterranean Office. He joins me now from Cairo. Good to have you on the program, Dr. Brennan. First of all, give us an overview of the situation in Yemen. Are the numbers to be believed, or should we be skeptical because it's difficult to get accurate numbers?
Well, I think we have to look at Yemen within the context of a background of enormous humanitarian need. Yemen's a country of close to 30 million people. 80% of them need some form of humanitarian assistance, with around 2/3 of them in very acute need. And as you rightly say, that's on the back of 5 years of ongoing conflict. But not only that, that's also on the back of decades of underdevelopment. So it's the largest, most complex humanitarian crisis that probably any of us have ever dealt with over the last 5 decades or so. And now COVID, the COVID pandemic, is adding a new level of complexity to that huge level of need and indeed suffering of the Yemeni people. As you rightly say, the numbers coming in right now are, official numbers are around 314 cases across the country. We believe within the international community and certainly amongst WHO that that's a significant underestimate of the health system is very, very indeed, and isn't in a good position to be able to detect all cases and certainly not manage all cases. So we have a very serious problem indeed. But the UN partners and our NGO partners are on the ground are doing all we can to ramp up the assistance right now.
Right. So even in previous years, the World Food Programme has had difficulty in getting food to people who are hungry. How does the WHO and others actually get to treating people who might be infected by COVID-19?
No, there are many operational constraints on the ground because of the insecurity. There's an ongoing conflict. There's over 30 front lines. Only 50% of health facilities are fully functional across the new travel restrictions. It's even harder to get the supplies and equipment in. But so prior to the COVID outbreak, however, I think we were able to achieve some pretty remarkable targets over the years. Last year, we vaccinated over 10 million children against measles. We met international standards in terms of the delivery of basic health care, curing of severely acutely malnourished. So in spite of all the operational constraints, we were able to meet some major international targets and standards in healthcare. COVID is making things more difficult.
Right.
We are still in the situation where we have to expand the number of testing facilities, the number of isolation and treatment facilities. We're not where we need to be, and we've got a major meeting with our donors on Wednesday this week and asking them to commit substantial amounts of money so we can take the response to scale. Right,
and again, given the history of the relationship between the UN and the belligerents, right? So when we looked at the World Food Programme at different times, whether it was the Saudi-led coalition or the Houthis, they tended to politicize the issue of aid. Sometimes they blocked aid and so on. When it comes to all of these players, are they, at least this time, with a global pandemic, making things easier, at least in the territory that they control, making it easier for the UN to do its work and help combat the coronavirus?
Yeah. So any outbreak, you need strong political leadership to get on top of it. It's particularly important in the setting of a pandemic. And as you rightly say, we have fragmented political leadership in the country right now. The Houthis in the north, the internationally recognized government out of Aden, and now more recently another breakaway group, the Southern Transitional Council. So it's very difficult to get the political alignment and the political leadership, which is absolutely vital to get on top of the outbreak, as you've seen in other countries across the world. There is a level of politicization in the country. So WHO tries to move beyond the politicization, be very frank and transparent about the needs. It's a constant negotiation. It's a negotiation that can't be led by the health sector. We look to the United Nations leadership on these issues as well as our partners working across other areas. But it requires constant vigilance and constant engagement of the leadership across all the different groups at this point. Okay.
Dr. Rick Brennan, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for giving us that update on the situation in Yemen out of your office in Cairo. Some food for thought there on the situation there against the backdrop of a devastating war that is not ending anytime soon, unfortunately. Thanks so much for joining us. That's it for this episode of The Newsmakers. We thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.